I am the famous American. We've talked about this before. It's time to revisit it in the year 2020 and really fathom this. Then when it really comes down to it, there are few exceptions to this rule. In general, most people on the planet, when you climb their family tree, you are going to find oppressors and those who were oppressed. I'll give you some obvious examples using my own DNA test results along with other family members of mine. Okay, so we know that mine says I'm around a third German, which that could also be French in there too, but ultimately about a third, in Dutch also, they kind of categorize those the same on MyHeritage. But roughly, in theory, a third German. We also know that when my mom took her test, it said 15.2% Sephardic Jewish. So by default, I've already got genetics that point back to a time when I had, whether it was ancestors or relatives, however it pans out in the history of time, we had Jewish people, we had German people. I have DNA that points back to both. Also, my mom had 14.1% West Asian, which ultimately is Iran, Iraq, etc. What we call Middle Eastern here in the United States. Well, look at world history. We see where we've got two more groups of people, Jewish people, we've got Middle Eastern people. There have been oppression going on there too. Then we can also look at them, still on my mom's side here, we can look at the fact of, that about half of my mom's heritage goes back to Mexico. Just 100 years ago, that's where everybody was still on that side of the family. So then we've got ultimately Native Americans, Spanish / European, Europeans, but specifically more namely Spanish. We've got oppression going on there. So, I mean, in my own family tree, in my own DNA, it's undeniable that I would not exist if oppression did not exist throughout world history. And it's saddening and it's troubling to imagine that that has always existed. It still exists, but it's in theory been worse in the past. So we have to come to a moment of reckoning and realizing, you know what? I must focus on what I can control and not on what I can't. I accept that in all of us, and maybe there's exceptions to the rule, but pretty much in all of us, on our DNA, we wouldn't exist if people didn't oppress each other. And it's just so dark to think of how many people were born on this planet because of and I'm just going to soften this language, a forced relationship. And even then, it's like, well, look, think about arranged marriages. I try not to think about this, it sounds so sad, but I think of like in India or parts of the Middle East where there is arranged marriage. And so I just think of this sweet little teenage girl, and then she has to get married to this greedy 40-year-old man, and she's forced into that marriage. She didn't do anything wrong, she doesn't want to, but if she doesn't marry him, then she'll probably end up much worse things happen. Like, that's a troubling thought for me. And that still happens today in all parts of the world. I understand that. So it's troubling thoughts. But, I'm all about facing my fears or facing the things that I don't want to face. I think it helps us become stronger people mentally when we do that. So that's how humanity is. It's like, and I've mentioned many times with Black Americans, and I made a video predicting this, and I was right about my findings. I asked African Americans or Black Americans, I asked, hey, I predict that when you take your DNA test, as far as how much African DNA you've got, it's probably going to be around 2/3, 3/4. That's about as much as you're going to show. You're not going to show 80%, you're not going to show 90 or more. Most likely, you're going to be around 2/3, 3/4 African, and the rest will be predominantly European. And the many Black Americans who responded agree with me. That's exactly what their DNA test showed. So what does that say about Black Americans? Well, again, it's troubling because we have to imagine there was a lot of, I'm going to soften language, forced relationships happening generations back. Now, that's our assumption. There could be certain Black Americans in which they actually had ancestors where it was a Black man that married a white woman or vice versa, because that did happen. And so be it. So maybe it wasn't a bad thing. But the moment, and I think there's almost a bit of, almost, should I say, reverse racism involved as far as this concept of thinking, I don't have any oppressive ancestors at all. So then you're ultimately saying that you're all the same race. Because typically, when we're looking at interracial relationships that lead to children, often there's some negative history going on there. There's oppression going on there. So I think it's interesting. It doesn't make us feel comfortable to talk about it, but I think to some degree we have to accept that it all happened before our time. We don't control the past. We accept what happened, we learn from it, and we don't want to repeat those. You see, that's what it's like to be here in the United States. We're overly aware of all of our racist past and all of our nations from our ancestors passed on to us. Now we wake up, we spawn, here we are, and we're living in the aftermath. Do you have more thoughts on that? Do you know where they belong? They belong right here.